Thank you very much. Good morning. All right. Okay, there's, as we said earlier, regarding the laws of Shabbat, there's the layer of the Torah law. Thank you. There's the layer of the Torah law. And then there's the layer of rabbinic law. And the rabbis wanted to distance us from even getting close to cooking on Shabbat. And you can imagine before there was electricity, so people would cook on coals, there would be little fires, and you'd put the pot on the fire, and you'd stir up the coals, and messing around with the coals, every time you stir them, you're violating a Torah law. Not only a Torah law of cooking, but also a Torah law of kindling, of lighting a fire. Stirring up the fire so that it burns stronger, it itself is one of the 39 categories of work. So there's two problems. We've got the problems of bishul, that's cooking, and the problem of havara, which is lighting fire. So the rabbis were wary that if you're going to do anything with coals, you might stir them up. And so they made the following prohibition. It's called hatmana. Hatmana. That's wrapping. Hatmana is what we do until today. Since we don't cook on Shabbat, but we want to keep the food hot. So we cook the food before Shabbat, and then we wrap it up so it stays hot. Nowadays, we have the ability to keep the fire on all night, all day long. If it's the hot plate is connected to the electricity continues to give it energy. But in the ancient world, before there was electricity, which we could use, what did we just say? Gustavo was saying that you have a small oven, you put in as much wood as you can, and then after a couple of hours it dies out. And so you won't have hot food in the morning. We dealt with using a non-Jew in the case of need, so that you don't freeze to death. But what about the food? So I'll tell you a personal story, but for that I need a cup of tea. My family, I'm lucky to be here. I'm a survivor, you could say that. I'll say it that way. My father was born in Poland. We heard a little bit about it the other day. Idan heard a little bit about it. My father, but you didn't hear the story. It's a great story. Grew up in Poland. He was born in Krakow, and he was about 5 years old or 3 years old. We're not sure exactly. The Nazis invaded Poland, and his father took his wife and his 5 children, including my father. My grandfather took everybody to run away. He ran away to, making a long story short, to the east. They went to Lemberg. Lemberg is Lvov. The Jewish, it's in the Ukraine. That's where there was some family. My grandmother had some family there. And they lived there for a number of years. Until the Russians sent them to Siberia. And when did they send them to Siberia? On Friday night? Okay, so why am I telling you this story right now? Because the custom was in Lemberg, in Lvov, this Jewish city, they didn't have electricity. This was not a common in 1939. It's a recent, we can't imagine that the world was so different, so few years ago. But so how did everybody keep their pots, their chillent? How did they keep their chillent hot until the next day? So there was in the town a Jewish bakery, and the Jewish bakery had a big oven where they would, bake industrially, so they had a very big oven. And all week long, they baked lots of bread for everybody in the town, for all the Jews, kosher bread. And on Friday night, it turned into a major. They stoked up the oven as much as they could, and then all the Jewish families would bring their chillin pot to the baker. And they lined up all the pots inside the big oven, because the oven was big enough to keep everybody's pots. And they kept it hot all night with whatever fuel they put in it. And then in the morning, after shul, every family would come to the bakery, get their pot back, and go home and eat their chillins. That's how they had hot food. Just to complete the story, now, as I said, my family was put on a train on Friday night to the east. They never got to see their chillin pot. They never got to eat their chillin. They were, for days traveling to the east. And then they were let off in the middle of Siberia and told to build their own homes. They had wood there. They cut down trees and built wood cabins, and they survived there for a year with care packages that were sent. Listen to this story. After the war, they made it. Not my grandfather, but the rest of the family survived. And they made their way to, they went back to Poland first, but there was nothing there. There was still anti-Semitism in Poland after the war. So they came to Israel, managed to get permission to come to Israel. And each of the kids were growing up and trying to find schools and things to do. And each of my uncles did something else. But they were in some kind of a transit camp. And along comes a visitor looking for them. He's looking for the Weinberg family from Krakow. Turns out, when they were in Lemberg and Lvov, the son of the baker, right, the big Jewish baker in the town, his name was Shidlov, and they had a son. And he helped them very much when they were there, living in the town. He brought them. He even tried to bring a buyer for my grandfather. Apparently had suitcases filled with zlotys that he'd sold a big factory. He just built a big factory in Krakow of 8 stories, and he sold it because the war was getting bad, and he took the money with him to the Ukraine. That's one of the reasons they were able to escape. Not all the Jews were able to escape, but my grandfather was a rich man. He was a big industrialist. He had a factory for building enamel roadsides or something like that. Anyways, he left, and I think there were Polish zlotys. Must have had like $1 million or more in Polish zlotys. And so the son, this Wolf, was his name, Wolf Shidlov, passed away. He brought a buyer, because his advice was, sell these zlotys. It's not going to be worth much very soon. And he tried to get somebody to buy them for him and, replace it with with Russian rubles or whatever it is, something like that. And he brought him. He had a meeting, and they didn't reach a price, and he didn't sell it. He didn't sell, and the next day, the Nazis canceled the whole currency, and he became a pauper. And my grandfather, was a beggar, and all of his 5 children, soon to be orphans, they had to eat out of soup kitchens because they lost all of his money because he didn't make the deal of his lifetime there. In any case, after the war, and so this Wolf Shidlov, this young man, apparently took a liking to my aunt. And after the war, he came looking. He survived. He was put in the concentration camps. He barely survived because he stayed. He was not a Polish immigrant, so the Russians didn't send him far away. He was a local. He got to stay. Lucky him. Eventually, the Nazis conquered them, and he was put in concentration camps. Baruch Hashem, he survived the war. Came looking for Luba. Was my aunt's name. Luba Weinberg, who became Luba. Shidlov became my aunt. It's a love story. It's a beautiful love story. Anyways, my grandmother apparently was very sharp. And, they're living in Israel in some kind of a temporary camp after the war. You can imagine refugees with nothing and, what they went through. This is 5 years later. This is 1945, after the war. 6 years they hadn't, seen anybody. And this Wolf Shidlov shows up. And, they were out of the house. He found where's the house. There was lists of, where the refugees are. Anyways, he found them. And first glance, she sees him from afar, and she starts yelling at him. Where's my chillin' pot? You owe me a chillin' pot. Because it was his father's, the bakery. And they left on Friday night. They had put their chillin' there together with all the pots to stay hot till the next morning. And anyways, the love story continued. And Baruch Hashem, he married my aunt. And eventually they moved on. They moved to Canada. And they had children and grandchildren. Baruch Hashem. This is my cousins. And I grew up with them. And it's an amazing survival story. But where's my chillin' pot? Like, after 6 years, she sees him, and a Holocaust later. But why did he have her chillin' pot? He had a chillin' pot because of this law. Because this law of Hatmana. This law is that, that we're not allowed to, light a fire on Shabbat. So we look for a way to keep the heat. Because we, as opposed to the Karaites, this was a big sticking point. As opposed to the Karaites, we do eat hot food on Shabbat, if you can. Keep it hot in the permissible way. So what's the permissible way? So we have this big oven, and if you have a bakery, great. The food can stay hot until the morning. Nowadays, of course, we have electricity, we have a plata. We have ways to keep the fire on. But in those days, it was harder. So let's say you don't have a big bakery. So what did people do? People would take their pot, heat it up till Erev Shabbat, till it was sundown, till a minute before sundown, not afterwards. And then they would wrap it up in blankets. Sometimes they would in feathers, all kinds of contraptions to heat it. Now, what some people were very smart. They said, okay, we'll heat it in. I don't think they had plastics then, but they had all sorts of materials which were more insulating and less insulating. The most insulating is if you could get inside that wrapping also some coals. Put some coals in the bottom, they'll continue to produce heat longer. And so the rabbi said, hang on, we got a problem here. Because we don't want people wrapping up their food with coals in it. Because they're going to stir the coals. Because, they wanted to make sure that the heat continues to produce heat for longer. And so the rabbis prohibited hatmana. Hatmana means wrapping. So insulating a pot with some type of wrapping. There's two types of insulation. There's insulation which increases the heat. There's also chemical, like nowadays it become popular in environmental science, right? Compost. Right, you can create heat. You have a chemical reaction with different the organic leftovers that they decompose and they have a reaction and it creates heat. So anything that's creating heat is prohibited. That's called hatmana b'davar shemosif hevel, something that increases the heat. There are certain types of course, coals and also all sorts of chemicals, chemical reactions. And but then they also prohibited b'davar she'ein mosif hevel, hatmana, and something which doesn't increase the heat; it just retains the heat. Like what do we use insulation today to retain heat? What?
The bottle, vacuum.
Yeah, thermos. A thermos that's insulated. Right, the sides of the walls are thicker, and they have some kind of insulating material. If you close it up really tight, it keeps it hot, not for 24 hours, but for 5 hours, 6 hours, depends on how well it's made. Can you use that on Shabbat? Well, That's a good question, because according to what we've been describing up till now, you're not allowed to insulate. You're not allowed to do hatmana. So we have to see if the thermos fits into these categories of what exactly is defined as hatmana. Okay, so that's the introduction. Take a look on page 196. We're going to open up our book, still chapter 10. Finish off some more halachot. Because lighting a fire on Shabbat is prohibited, it's difficult to keep food warm. Nowadays we have electric platas to solve the problem, but in the times of the sages it was a great challenge. One way to accomplish this was to place the pot of cooked food in the oven, as we said before, and another way was through hatmana. Top of page 197. Everybody see where I'm reading? That's chapter 10, section 22. Enveloping the pot in wool or a different material to preserve its heat. However, there are two rabbinic prohibitions that limit hatmana. The first applies before Shabbat, the second on Shabbat. The first prohibition is that one may not insulate using a material that itself generates heat, such as hay or olive dregs. It's like the compost I was saying. This prohibition goes into effect even before Shabbat begins. The sages were worried that if people insulated food on Friday using these materials, they might mistakenly conclude it was permissible to insulate foods on Friday using coals, and they would end up stoking the coals. Therefore, the sages forbade insulating foods before Shabbat using heat-generating materials. However, one may insulate food using materials that do not generate heat, such as clothing, towels, blankets, and the like, as long as one does this before Shabbat. So you're allowed to take your pot off the fire and wrap it up. I've done this a number of times. When I didn't have a plata, or you want to keep something hot, you wrap it up in a blanket. That's allowed because a blanket doesn't generate heat. And that's allowed if you do it before Shabbat. The second rabbinic prohibition is that one may not insulate warm food on Shabbat itself, even when the material used does not generate additional heat. This is due to the concern that if insulating on Shabbat were permitted, some people would first heat the food on the fire and then insulate it, thus violating the prohibitions of mavir and bishul. So you cannot insulate on Shabbat itself. Can I take a little bit of hot water from my urn and put it into a thermos? It's on Shabbat. The thermos is not generating heat, but it's on Shabbat. You're not allowed to do hatmana, insulating on Shabbat. Here he says one may fill a thermos with hot water on Shabbat, because placing something hot into a utensil is not considered hatmana. Similarly, one may add a bag of rice or other foods to be cooked in the chillent pot while keeping it separate from the chillent, because hatmana does not apply to insulating one food within another. That's some people do. Place one food inside of another in a bag, which not going to deteriorate. You can keep the foods a little bit separate, but that's food and food. These are two examples of permitted insulation. But you should know that there is this problem of hatmana. Now, where does it get practical? That a prohibition? The next section, section 23. The bottom of page 197. One may not wrap pots on the plata with towels or blankets, even before Shabbat, although the towels or blankets do not generate heat. Nevertheless, since the pot is on the plata, and the plata generates heat, this is considered insulating with something that generates heat, which is forbidden even before Shabbat. Prohibition of hatmana. Here is where we get the leniencies. Have you ever seen? They actually sell them in the bookstores. It's a special Judaica item, a towel or some kind of a quilt, which says on it the words Shabbat usually, and it's designed for putting on top of pots on the plata to keep them warm. How is that allowed? He says the prohibition of hatmana applies only when the pot is wrapped on all sides. But if it is not surrounded, there's no prohibition. Therefore, one may wrap most of the pot on the plata with a towel or blanket, because as long as the pot is not entirely covered, there's no prohibition of hatmana. One may do this even on Shabbat. Similarly, one may place a pan on top of a pot and drape a towel over the pan. As long as the towel does not touch the sides of the pot, it is not considered hatmana. Okay, so yes, they sell these special Shabbat plata covers because it helps keep the food warmer As I said yesterday, not all the platas are warm enough for people's tastes, and they want to keep the food even warmer. So if you cover it on top, the heat doesn't escape, and you have even hotter food on Shabbat. That's allowed as long as you don't totally wrap the food, right? The original hatmana was when you wrap it up on all sides. Okay? This is the law of hatmana. I wanted to, that's a rabbinic prohibition. Nowadays, it's less, the main practical halacha we have to know about it is not to wrap our pots totally from all sides. Okay, there's a question about the slow cooker. Some people use the slow cooker for their cholent. You know what I'm talking about? A crock pot, it's called in some places. You have one. You have one in your room. Do you want to bring it in? Also, you wanted to show me something else.
Yeah, questions about that in general.
In general. So first bring the crock pot, and then the other questions about kashrut in general we'll talk about. Show and tell, it's the best, right?
Yes.
We have it, why not?
Yes.
Yaakov, how are you this morning? Perfect. You know what, everything works together. Someone told me last night that the reason why Israel is begging for help from the Americans now is because we need more bombs. We need the weapons we have, but we're running out of ammunition. What about all of the America has stores of ammunitions in many different countries around the world, just in case, including Israel or Jordan. Apparently, they're all empty now. You know why they're empty now? Because America sent them to the Ukraine and to help Zelensky fight off the Russians. And so we're in a little bit of a tight bind. That's really why we're afraid of having a war in the south and in the north at the same time. We need to have enough bombs. We need enough rockets.
I don't know, but we don't have our own.
Well, we have, but it's the short-sightedness of our leadership. Of course, we've seen this in the conceptia, the mistaken concepts. Oh, we're so strong, we have enough. And,
There'll be a kind of a trouble because there is a mitzvah which says once you enter to live in Israel, you're not supposed to live forever. So we cannot escape according to this law.
Listen, we're staying in Israel. There's no question about it. We're going to fight and we're going to be successful. No question about it. That's a machine. Put it here. What is that? Okay, so it has a plug. I see. So you plug it in. Okay, and this is all right. Lift it out.
Baking and roasting.
Okay, and then we see here there's a pot. This is just a regular pot.
This is multi-cooker.
Sorry?
Also,
A multi-cooker, yeah. And inside, so what? This is just a regular pot. What's this? So as you can see, this is a plug. This is connected to the electricity. And the reason why this is important is because, help me. Hold that part, please. Hold the lid. The lid is a little heavy. So you can see here, this is an element. This is a heating element that heats up. And other ones, not this one. Some have an element in the sides also.
On the top as well.
Here they also have a heating element on top. So you have on the bottom and on top a heating element. Some of the crock pots have heating elements around the sides. And we can put it down now. And the pot goes inside this. Close it up. And you plug it in. And you're getting heat. And it's a slow cooker. You can be on slow heat. And it can cook for 12 hours, 24 hours. Many people use this. There's other methods to it. Like this is not just a slow cooker. It's also called a pressure cooker. Because this actually is sealed. You can seal this and it can create pressure and can cook fast because of the great pressure. But it can be used as a slow cooker. So most crock pots don't have this big heavy lid. They just have a regular lid. But
Is that alternative then?
yes.
Oh, this is
It's for pressure cookers.
This is the special pressure cooker. Right. And then there's a little valve to let out if it's too much pressure. But this creates that's for fast cooking. But without this lid, you just have a regular lid, which this is not just such a regular lid. This is a lid that has an element in it too. But so most crock pots just have the bottom piece, and then they have a regular cover. So if we had that, let's talk about that first, and we'll talk about the
Okay,
other
I'm buying.
things.
How much does it cost?
That's it. That looks nice, huh? And you can make a nice stew in it. You put in your meat and beans and barley usually and vegetables, and that's what cholent is. And it's a nice slow cooker that's perfect for making cholent, right? Cholent, you're going to eat it after 12 hours. Right? You make it at 4 in the afternoon. You eat it or 16 hours. You have it at 10 or 12 in the morning. And this is designed for cooking slowly. Not the pressure cooker part, that's for fast, but anyways, is this allowed on Shabbat? Can you make your cholent? So let's assume, we didn't get into the details of it. Basically, the instruction was, we had yesterday, you have to cook, pre-cook. Prepare the food before Shabbat. So you're putting on your meat and your beans and your vegetables, not a minute before Shabbat, a couple of hours before Shabbat, so that it can get cooked. Now, because it's a very low temperature, a slow cooker, you can keep it on low temperature for another, and that's the nature of a stew, is it gets even tastier as it continues to cook. But it's fully cooked. Ideally, it should be fully cooked before Shabbat. There's some fancy tricks you can play, but let's keep it simple. You cooked it before Shabbat, and you're using this device to keep it warm until the next day. Well, why not? If it's fully cooked and you're just keeping it warm, it's like a plata. You can keep your food warm on the plata. What's the problem? Some people ask the question. They say, well, if this is covered, right here's my pot, and if around it I have this casing, and on top I have a cover. Maybe that's like wrapping. That's hatmana. And that is a rabbinic prohibition. We're not allowed to wrap things up in something that generates heat. Right? It's always going to be generating heat. And we said even from Friday you're not allowed to do that. To wrap something up in something that's generating heat. Now the truth is, this particular machine, I think is more problematic than most, because this is totally wrapped. The cover too. This cover is, it's almost like it's the top of the oven, because it has the element in it. Most crock pots, they just have like a cover, like a regular pot cover.
That's
And
okay.
And so the rabbi, that's what we're going to read now. There's a debate, of course. But most rabbis say that, well, wrapping has to be totally wrapped. All the sides and the top. And if you just have a regular pot cover, it's open. It's not wrapped. So it's allowed because it's generating heat. It's true. That would make it. And it's a little bit wrapped on the sides. The sides are definitely wrapped here. But the top is open. Top is open. It should be allowed. So there's a debate. I think most poskim say that it's allowed. Some people say it's not enough, because there's an opinion that says that if it's wrapped on all the sides, like this is, it's wrapped on all the sides, it should be forbidden, even if the top is open. And so what do they say? How is that allowed? Well, they say here, I'm not sure that this heter would work. In many crock pots, you have this pot, and it fits in really nicely, right? Does it go all the way down to the bottom? So here it does. You can hear it. Clink. Right? It clinks at the bottom. You hear that? That's the switch that it uses for, its mechanism. Most crock pots do not have a switch on the bottom. As a matter of fact, you can even, and some people do this, you even take a little bottle cap, a metal one, or a marble, and you put it in here on the bottom, let's put down a few of these. Right? And that way, no clink. Means that there's air. There's a layer of air. There's a space between the pot and the heating element, and therefore that's not considered wrapping if it's not, touching the pot itself. So if the pot is elevated, and in most crock pots, the pot has a little bit of half an inch, because it sits on this rim. The rim of the pot sits on the rim of the container, and the bottom doesn't actually touch. So that's why most families use a crock pot, and they assume there's no problem of hatmana, because it's not really wrapped on the bottom and on the top, and if it's just the sides, that's allowed, according to most poskim. So the slow cooker, some people even call a crock pot a chillent pot. It's in religious families, that's its primary use. In some families, they use it every day. Yeah, many times you go out to work for 9 hours, you come back, you want a hot meal. You don't start preparing cooking now, so you prepare ahead of time. You put it in the pot, and it stews over the course of the day. You come home, your meal is prepared. That's the benefit of having a slow cooker. So some people use it every day, but in Jewish homes, mostly it's known as a cholent pot, because it's really useful for keeping the food hot until the next day, and it stews slowly. And as long as you make sure that it's cooked before Shabbat. Most poskim allow it, except this kind. This kind, we have a problem. It's directly touching the bottom, right? And it has a wrapping on top. This doesn't really even have a pot cover. It has a cover of the entire contraption, right? This lid covers the wrapping too, so it's totally wrapped. It's not just a pot cover. This is a wrapping. This is exactly what's prohibited. Hatmana bedavar hamosif hevel. It's wrapping in something that generates heat, and this is fully wrapped. So
Do they have the option to cook only at the bottom? Or is it automatically?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why the thing.
It doesn't have to come from the top.
no, but you'll need to have this closed.
Why?
If you could do it with it open, then it would
You
be.
can saute with it open, but
You can't do slow cooking with it open. Yeah. Anyways, also we have the problem that it is touching the bottom.
Can you cook with a separation?
What do you mean? You can't cook on Shabbos at all. We're talking about cooking before Shabbos and then keeping it hot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Amen.
So this type of food cooker is not a regular. It's called a ninja food cooker. I've never seen one of these. It's quite a multifunctioning device. It's very interesting. And I see, is there also a fan in the top?
yeah.
It's a fan. I see there's an element in the top and a fan.
It can be like an oven.
You can bake bread in it. You can bake bread. It's a cool machine. But I wouldn't use it on Shabbat. Not for Shabbat. We'll talk about the kashrus in another class. We'll talk about it. It's very interesting laws of kashrut as well. Maybe we'll take a break, and during the break we'll talk about the kashrut. But let's just focus in here on the laws of Shabbat. This is not a standard crock pot. If you look on page 198 at the bottom where we were reading, some prohibit using a slow cooker, a pot made of ceramic or porcelain, surrounded by a metal housing that contains a heating element, because of hatmana, since the pot is surrounded by the heating element. If the food inside is uncooked, they maintain that there's an additional prohibition, as it constitutes leaving a pot on an uncovered fire. In contrast, others feel there's no prohibition of hatmana in this case, since the top of the pot is visible. In order to avoid the issue of hashaya, the food is not fully cooked, let's cover the knobs that control the temperature. This is the halacha in practice. So he's lenient. He allows you to use the crock pot. As I was telling you, I think most families do. But you do have to be careful that there is a little bit of a separation between the food pot and the casing. And as long as you keep it uncovered on top as well, so it's not hatmana. But this is one interesting ramification or application of the laws of hatmana, this rabbinic stricture of wrapping up things. A thermos, you actually put the food in the pot. The thermos itself is insulated. It's not like you have a pot and then you insulate the pot with other things. So that's another reason that it's allowed. That's it. Okay, thank you for the demonstration. So now once we're at it, that's before we put it away. In terms of kashrut, can you kasher? Let's say somebody used this for non-kosher food. Can you make it kosher? I think you purchased it from someone. You don't know if he kept kashrut or not.
Yeah.
Maybe it was meaty. He used it for meat, and then you want to use it for milk. Can you kosherize it? Those are a different set of laws. So you have to learn B'ezras Hashem sometime soon. The tricky part here is the cover.
Mm-hmm.
So the bottom, all this casing, it doesn't really touch the food. This pot can be kashered very easily, like any other pot. You heat up hot water in it, you boil it up, and you let it spill over, and that's called haga'ala. Usually pots which are used with liquid, that's the way they're kosher, that's the way you can kosherize them. The problem is the casing here. When you close this, the casing, for sure this part, it gets full of steam from the food. And if it's not kosher food or if it's meaty food, the meaty taste, we assume that it enters the sides, the housing. And how are you going to immerse this in boiling hot water? It has a heating element, it can get ruined. And you'd have to, since it's all part of one unit, because the mist is going to go onto these sides too, not only on the pot. The mist is going to be in this whole casing area. You'd have to take the whole thing and put it into a pot of boiling hot water. It'd be hard to find the pot. But let's say you even could find a pot. It's electric. It could get ruined. All the electronic device could get ruined.
I had a question about that. If I use its own heating ability to boil water inside it, and then the steam got everywhere that it normally would go anyway.
Right.
Would that
Right.
be interesting?
It could be. It could be allowed.
Yeah.
It could be allowed. Just heat up some water inside the machine itself. Would that be enough to be considered haga'ala? It's a good question. The problem also is that you could also, can you fry things in this? You could say you bake things, right? You could bake things. So that means that this heating element, and maybe the one on the bottom is if you ever used it without any water, then the laws of kashrut are is that you have to kasher it with fire. The way the taste went in, it has to come out. So if you're just using it with fire, you have to get it really, really hot. And I think this pot would be ruined if you used a blowtorch on it or something like that to get it really, really hot, let alone the rest of the machine. Doing libun. Now, libun kal is another method. If you put it on maximum, like you do in many ovens, we're makel that we can kasher the oven. If you just put it on maximum, of course, make sure everything's clean. You wait 24 hours. All sorts of rules. But there is a possibility of using libun kal. And I'm wondering whether that would be allowed. What's this? Does this come off?
I'm not sure. Because I have a lot of questions about this element in general, I just haven't used it at all.
I see.
I've only used this one, which doesn't have any electronics, and I could tovel it easily.
Toveling is not the same.
Yeah.
Toveling is something else.
Yeah.
This is basically
It's just
an aluminum,
plastic lid.
a metal, fancy lid because it's got this valve to let the water out for the pressure cooker. Right, this the valve, and I don't know what that does, but that maybe is an additional. There's a vent for air. but this is no electronics in it, right?
No.
So this you could immerse into a vat of boiling hot water very easily. And then if you've never used this without liquid, then you might be able to kosher it. Now the general rule is we don't switch. We don't switch pots and pans from milchik to tefeshet, except once a year. Once a year, you're allowed to. When's that once a year? Erev Pesach, right? Before Pesach starts, people are koshering their dishes from the chametz to the no chametz, and so at the same time, you're allowed to flip over, but not during the rest of the year. It's just confusing. The rabbis, rightly so, said we shouldn't do that. But that's the time when everybody's koshering their dishes, and so you'll relabel it or whatever it is, and it can be switched from meaty to milky or to parva. Now, in most cases, you can cook parva in a meaty pot as long as you don't put any meat in that. It doesn't after 24 hours it doesn't get any taste. But we don't use pots that are treif. If the pot was used for non-kosher food, so you can't cook your kosher food in them. Even if the taste won't transfer, it's just not allowed. So we have to determine if you think that there was non-kosher food used or not.
Maybe you can buy a new pot. I think
That might help, but not with the cover.
Before I got it was only used for one meal of chicken, so I need to.
Do you know who used it?
Contact you.
So call them up and say, was the chicken kosher chicken?
Yeah.
Everything else should be fine. Most chicken bought and sold in Israel is kosher, so the chances are you're okay. And everything you cook now won't have become fleshik after 24 hours. I said you can cook up pasta in a fleshik pot, and it's not fleshik. It's not meaty. Okay. Anyways, this is an interesting contraption. And for Shabbat, to use this as a crock pot, a slow cooker to keep your chillent in, I think it's more problematic because this lid is not just a lid; it's a lid that has insulation in it. I think that's the point of this pressure cooker lid, is that it's also insulated, and it looks like it's a lid of the contraption, not a lid of the pot. Like the crock pot that I have, did you see it on Shabbat? We used it for chillin'. Anyways, there's basically there's a lid that fits with the inner pot. That ceramic pot usually. This is actually a metal pot. Doesn't matter whether it's ceramic or metal, but the lid is the cover of the pot. The lid is the cover of the pot and the insulation. So this is essentially what's prohibited. Insulating in something which generates heat, I wouldn't feel comfortable allowing this. What he discusses here, and he essentially allows, is what I was describing, that there's a pot that sits inside a metal housing, but then there's no insulation on top. There's no special cover. It's just a regular pot cover on top. And also the significant that a lot of rabbis say that you have to have that airspace between the bottom of the pot. And so it's not really being insulated, or it's not directly inside. Now, why do I mention this? Because there is an oven which you can buy in Israel, maybe as well in Israel, that has a Shabbat switch. What is an oven with a Shabbat switch? It says on it Shabbat. So you're still not allowed to cook. You have to cook everything before Shabbat. The question is, how can you keep things warm? So we have a plata. But someone manufacturer said, well, I have an idea. I don't want to buy a separate plata. Let's use the oven. Keep the pot, cook the pot before Shabbat, cook the food, and then I'll leave it in the oven the entire Shabbat. Put it on low, and then Shabbat morning I'll be able to take my chillent out of the oven. It's a great idea. Someone said to him, oh, there's a problem because every time you open and close the door of the oven, there's a thermostat. That if the cold air goes in, the oven's going to turn on. And the oven's really small. And so every time you open up the door, a lot of cold air comes in. So you'll be turning on the oven. And so you won't be able to get your food out. Because the thermostat, it usually turns off the oven and turns it on every once in a while. But most of the time it's off. But when you open the oven, you'll be turning it on. You can't be causing the oven to turn on Shabbat. So that's what the Shabbat switch does. Shabbat switch does, we disable the thermostat. And they put it on some kind of a program so that it's a low heat the entire Shabbat. And maybe it goes on and off on a timer, but the point is it doesn't get affected by your opening and closing the door. It's a nice invention. And that's kosher. What's the problem? What do some people say? If you have a pot, here's your oven, okay? You have an oven door with a handle that you can pull out, right? It opens up, and inside the oven, you have this little pot filled with your chillins. You know what I'm saying? So what's the problem? Some people said, wait a minute. Isn't this insulation? Isn't this a pot that's covered by all sides? It's inside. And it should be not allowed. It's just like this one. No, the rabbi said it's okay. Why? Because this pot doesn't have any insulation around it. Like a blanket, like we said, right? You wrap it up. It's not wrapped. There's air in between the pot and the walls of the oven have the heating elements, usually on top and on bottom. So because there's airspace around the pot, that's not considered to be hatmana. The only problem is that many poskim say you should not put it back on Shabbat. You can use that device to keep your cholent pot hot until the next day, but once you take it out, we said yesterday, sometimes you take off the pot, you want to put it back on. Take it off, put it back on for other people or whatever you want to heat up. Take something out of the fridge and you put it on your plata on Shabbat. If it's dry, we said it's allowed yesterday, right? With this device, you can't do that because there is a prohibition of heating things up inside the oven. Inside the oven looks too much like cooking. And so this Shabbat switch is useful for using the oven as a hot plate to keep it warm overnight till the next day, but you can't put it back. You can't use it for heating things up. That's, I think, the correct halacha. Some rabbis might be lenient and say, well, it's not quite the same oven as they had then, and even it's not the same thing as putting it inside. But to me, it looks like putting it inside an oven. You're not allowed to put things inside an oven on Shabbat because it looks like cooking. Okay. How many people have a crock pot? Not too many. It's making me hungry just thinking of it, right? Delicious cholent. Shmuel, did you have some? You got some leftovers from the Shabbat cholent?
No, yeah, I was going to have it last night, but I got home and...
Oh, okay. Well, you have a refrigerator, you heat it up later. Okay. But we all have the following problem. And this is a serious problem. To keep the laws of Shabbat, you're not allowed to cook, right? So, okay, no problem. We'll pre-cook our food. What's the problem? And then we'll put it on a plata, a warming device. Perfect. We got a system. You know what we don't have a system for yet? Or not a great system. Or it's still a very big issue. Turning on the tap. To wash your hands? Or to wash your dishes. What's the problem? I'm not cooking anything. I'm washing my hands. Aha. With the cold water, you're right. It's fine. No problem. Letting the water through the pipes and it's cold and you wash your hands. No problem. But if you turn on the hot tap, It's also no problem. I'm using the hot water. I'm not cooking anything. Yes, you are. In most houses in the Western world, whenever you turn the tap to take out water, hot water, there is, okay, here's your tap, here's your sink, and you've got your hot water tap and your cold water tap, and the water comes out here. Terrific, right? We're all good? Okay, but that hot water comes from a pipe, and it comes out of a big boiler that has a heating element on the bottom usually, and it has a pipe of cold water going in, and this is where the hot water comes out, and this is filled. It's always filled. Yes, shalom, shalom aleichem.
יש לנו אורחת, גברת אביב, נכון?
שלום, עליזה, מי?
אורחת, יא.
ברוכה הבאה, בבקשה. שמחה רבה.
תודה.
יופי, טוב. נלמד קצת הלכות שבת ביחד. אוקיי.
אני בהמשך המסדרון בצד שמאל, יש לי משרד שם.
Okay, בוקר טוב. How's your English?
I'm fine.
You're fine.
I understand you. Thank you.
Oh, okay, okay. Or we can do it in Portuguese, right? Or Spanish? What do you speak?
Spanish, Portuguese.
Spanish or Portuguese? Okay. Wait, but maybe we should do Chinese. Ukrainian or Filipino. British English. It's a different dialect. So whatever, we'll try to do English. I don't know those languages. Okay, so we're learning about when you. The problem is that when you, the way the hot water heaters work is when you open up the hot water to wash your hands, you take out some of that hot water, but this boiler always has to be filled continually. It's almost a vacuum, if I understand correctly. Whenever water is pulled out on one side, cold water comes in. And that means that the cold water is going to come into this, what did we learn yesterday? It's called the Kli Rishon. It has a heating element in it. It's heating up water. It's like a hot water urn. It's like the kettle we just showed you yesterday. And this hot water, this cold water coming in is going to get heated up. And when are you doing this? On Shabbat. You're cooking the water on Shabbat. Every time you take hot water out of the tap. Big problem. It's a big problem. That's why I don't use the hot water on tap on Shabbat. Now there are some solutions, but in many houses it's a problem. Around the world, Orthodox Jews avoid using the hot water tap on Shabbat. You want to wash your dishes? Doesn't work as well. You use cold water. Use cold water to wash your dishes. Now here in Israel, it's actually a little bit easier. Because there's a law that every home, this is actually environmentally friendly, countries around the world have copied us. Every home that has a hot water boiler must, by law, and there's a certain rule, how big the house is, whatever, you have to have a solar-powered hot water boiler as well. In most homes, it's the same boiler that has two systems. There is an electric device which heats up this element, which heats up the hot water. But also there's a switch, and this is connected to solar panels, right, on the roof. And the solar panels collect the heat from the sun. And the sun, there's a circulation here of water, and it goes into here already hot. So if the water is heated by the sun, that's not a problem. We said yesterday, heating directly from the sun, you can fry an egg on the sidewalk, right? because it's heating from the sun. There's no fire. It's not the normal way of cooking. So many rabbis say that if you have solar in the summertime, the water is not going to be heated by the electricity, which is a problem. You're heating the water in the sun, and that's allowed. And so there are some rabbis who say you're allowed to use the hot water on Shabbat, at least on sunny days, because there's an automatic switch in some homes that if there's not enough sun, then the electric will go on. Well, if there's electric, then you're cooking not with the sun, you're cooking with fire. Cooking with fire, this heating element is what heats it, not the solar panels that heat it. And then there's there's a long discussion. We're not going to get into it in great detail, but there are some rabbis that say the way these solar panels are made to work with the boiler, it's a problem even with the solar panels. One consideration is, for example, when you have some cold water going into here, what do you have here in the boiler? It's filled with, it's not filled with cold water. It's filled with boiling hot water that was already heated up from the element. So are you allowed to place an egg in a pot of boiling hot water? I said, you're not allowed to. The boiling hot water was heated by the element, by the fire. And so you're not allowed to cook even in cold water going into the hot water. We'll be cooking by something which was cooked by the heating elements, by the fire. Anyways, the best advice, keep it simple. Don't use the hot water tap on Shabbat. If you need to, if there's a great need, many times there's a need for children in the house, they need to take a bath, and you have to have some warm water. If it's a solar powered hot water heater, like many homes in Israel is, there's room to be lenient. There are rabbis who say that this is heating it from the sun and not from fire, and that's allowed. But it's complicated because what if it's a cloudy day and there's an automatic, it turns over, switches over to electricity, and the heating element is what's heating it, not the solar heat. So that's something to be aware of. Okay? Yeah, question?
I have a question. In my house, there's no solar panel, but there is a water boiler. But the water boiler, let's say it's pre-cooked before Shabbat. When Shabbat comes, before Shabbat, I off it. So am I allowed to use the hot water inside the boiler?
Of course, there are other systems. This is just the most popular one. Most homes are like that. There's other types of hot water heaters. If you have a system where you can turn off the system, and so when you take out the hot water and use it to wash your hands, to wash your dishes, no cold water is going to get heated up, then it's fine. Then it's fine, by all means.
No, I think the water always automatically comes into the boiler.
Right.
Yeah, but I have turned off the boiler.
No, but if you have hot,
that's the question.
You have hot water in the tank. Cold water comes in, mixes with the hot water. It's boiling the cold water, the hot water.
There's some families where there's different jobs on Erev Shabbat. We talked about the stress, getting ready for Shabbat. You have to have everything ready before sundown, right? So some people's jobs is to set up the candles. Other people's to set the timer for the lights to go on and off at the proper time. In some families, they have a job. Usually it's a young child. And the job is open up the hot water tap and let the hot water run out, the boiling hot water, until it becomes lukewarm. Then you're sure that the entire evening, the water that you're going to use, fine, you'll have cold water going into the boiler whenever you take out the warm water. But it's not going to be heated by the hot water, because the water that's in there is already cooled down. You only have lukewarm water, or water that's not 45 degrees, okay? And so that is allowed, as long as the element is not going to go on, you can turn off the element. Then you can, so some families actually do that. They take out to make sure that there's no boiling hot water in the boiler. It's called a dud in Hebrew. A dud, this boiler is called a dud. And it's usually on the roof or somewhere near the roof, and you can see them Bezrat Hashem, you'll be homeowners soon, and you'll know how to. Every once in a while, every year or so, you have to actually replace this heating element. The heating element inside the dude gets filled with calcium because our water in Israel is hot, is hard. There's a lot of calcium in the water, so it ruins the heating elements, and they don't heat up well. And most people call a plumber. But, I do it myself. Wait, you have a plumber coming? Yeah? You know what I'm talking about? So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so questions? This is something to be aware of. A lot of people don't know that it's a problem to use the hot water from the taps on Shabbat, unless, as I said, if there's a need, you definitely can rely on the solar heated water when there's a need. Okay, so he talks about it here inside. We don't have to see all the details. You can, of course, follow that. With this, I think we've covered all we want to cover about the laws of Bishul. Okay, that was our first out of the 39. Okay, yes?
Before Shabbat already put the water on the paste, and the paste already set the timer, and then on the time and the paste and keep
The plata, you mean? What do you mean the place?
the
plata, yeah. You put, so
and
you
then
put,
the water
yeah.
will coming out steam water on the top.
Okay.
It's okay.
If you have a pot of water on the plata, it'll continue to steam.
Yeah. Before I set the timer, before Shabbat already set.
That's fine. It's no problem. Sure. Okay. We have to stop here, and we'll continue with Hashem more Hilchot Shabbat another day. All right. Bakasha.
Yosef, I wrote you a message if you want to sit with Chaim Cohen this afternoon, one-on-one. And you done?
Okay.
You'll turn this on?